as we get into Jeremiah chapter 5, we are going to find once again that we are talking about judgment. I know you're all surprised because Jeremiah tends to be a rather fun book of lighthearted anecdotes. Not really. But anyway, so beginning of chapter 5, remember that at the end of chapter 4, we saw this idea that it says, "For I heard a cry as a woman in labor, anguish as one giving birth to her first child," talking about Judah and the pain that they're going through because of God's judgment as what's being born is really the idea. So at the beginning of chapter 5, it says, "Run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem. Look and take note. Search your squares to see if you can find a man and one who does justice and seeks truth, that I may pardon her." Now, notice let's deal with the gender discussions here for just a minute. Run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem. Look and see if you can find any man who is doing justice and seeking truth, who is doing exactly what they're supposed to and following God. And then it says that I may pardon her. Well, who's the her? It's the city. So notice the picture here. Go see if you can find anyone in the city of Jerusalem who's doing what they're supposed to, that I might pardon the entire group. So now let's make sure we understand. This connects directly to the story in Genesis of Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's what I was thinking of.
God says their sin has become so bad that I'm going to destroy the whole place. And what does Abraham do? He talks him down to 10 people. Hey, in this city of thousands, if there are 10 people who are doing what they're supposed to, will you spare the city? Absolutely. That is what Jeremiah that's what Jeremiah is speaking of. Hey, go search everywhere in Jerusalem and see if you can find somebody who's following me with all their heart. Because if there is, I won't destroy them. Then verse 2, though they say, "As the Lord lives." Okay, now, this is important. The "as the Lord lives" would have been a popular promise. You know how, I swear on my mother. That's a big thing now. You swear on your mother's life, you swear on your kids' lives, do that. That's really what, just as the Lord lives, I'll do what they say, yet they swear falsely. Oh Lord, don't your eyes look for truth? You have struck them down, but they felt no anguish. You have consumed them, but they refuse to take correction. So what does it mean? You've struck them, but they've refused to be ashamed. They've refused to recognize the pain they're going through. You've consumed them, but they refuse to take correction. Kind of in the discussion of story, I always laugh about this. I think it was at Emmaus, an opening for Emmaus, and it says this guy's driving down the road in a Porsche, and he pulls up to stop, and he opens his door, and a semi comes through and just takes the door right off.
So lucky.
And the police show up, and the police officer's kind of looking at him, and he's just ranting and raving about his car and the door and how much he spent on this car and all of that. And the police officer finally goes, hold on. I know you're upset about your car, but have you recognized that you were still holding the door to the car and it ripped your arm off? And he looks and sees that his arm's there, and he goes, "Oh no, my Rolex." Okay. Now, why do I bring that up? Because that's what it's talking about. Yeah. You struck them down, but they felt no anguish. Mm-hmm. They have refused to recognize that they've been injured.
What matter didn't count.
I watch a bunch of EMT. It's kind of funny EMT stuff, and one of them is real things I've seen as a paramedic. And a guy's in his car, and somebody drove by his car, and he goes, "They shot up my car. And he goes, "Yeah, but you've been hit too." So he was wounded. He had bullets in him, and yet he was focused more on his car. Well, that's the discussion here. You have struck them, and yet they have ignored their injuries. You have consumed them, but they've refused to take correction. They refuse to do anything to fix it. They have made their faces harder than rock, and they've refused to repent. So they've turned their face to stone. They've got one expression. They're going to hold to it no matter what. Well, what is that expression? Well, in the terminology we're getting at, it's that expression of pride. It's that head up, looking down the nose. I'm better than you because I'm a Jew. That's what it is.
Holier than now.
Right. They have refused to repent. Remember that God uses a huge number of terms to express this attitude. Stiff-necked, right? Your neck's so stiff you can't bow it. Your face is hard. By the way, just think in your head and you can think of someone who has that. You've seen that before. The hardened face, the stiff neck, all of those things. Then Jeremiah steps in to try to speak on their behalf. He says, but these are only the poor. So these are only the common people. They have no sense. They don't know the way of the Lord. They haven't learned anything. They haven't been taught the way of the Lord, the justice of their God. Let me go to the rulers. Let me go to the kings and the princes and the priests and the Levites and all the people who are important, and I'll speak to them. For they know the way of the Lord and the justice of their God. And then at the end of verse 5, but they all alike had broken the yoke. They had burst the bonds. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean? Well, they're a wild ox. Broken the yoke, burst the bond. A yoke is a tool that was used to hold a set of animals for work, whether pulling a cart, pulling a plow, They have broken free of their yoke. They are no longer following God. They have burst the boundaries that God has placed upon them. They are living however they want. Remember, all the way back at the beginning of Judges, it's one of the most powerful statements that sometimes we miss at the very end of Judges. And it says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Mm-hmm. And we look at that, and some people go, well, yeah, because it's not until the next book that Israel gets their first king. But that's not what he means. Who was supposed to be their king? God was supposed to be their king. Yes. Understand that the reason that in Judges we see this idea of a judge, which was a local leader, was God's king. Under him, he has faithful men that are judges. So, by the way, let's make sure we understand Moses, although that's not how he's titled, would have been a judge. Okay, now beyond that, he was a prophet and all of those things, but by title, he would have been a judge. And it says that that's what he was. Because what happens when Moses' father-in-law shows up? He spent all day judging.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did he judge? Here's what your king says. They would come to him, hey, we're having this issue where we're she stole my camel, he took my bread bowl, whatever it is. Okay, here's what the king says. You need to do this. You need to do this as recompense for what happened. And his father-in-law goes, hold on, you are killing yourself. And you are not doing a good job because of all these people. So go in and find faithful men to serve under you. Okay, but what was their job? The same as Moses. The guy who was over 50 was to, in wisdom and with prayer and all of those things, determine for those people underneath him what God had for them. And if he goes, well, I don't know for sure, this is kind of a big deal, and I'm not sure that I'm up for the task here, then he goes up to, right. By the way, our entire judicial system is built that way. You have a magistrate judge who's over one little town. You have a district judge who's over, 3 or 4 little towns. You have a state, then above even the state judge, you have an appellate judge who's federal over an area. And then finally, if you really get into a big deal and a big stink, you end up at the Supreme Court. Here's the fun part of that. Each of their jobs, and let's make sure we understand, is to interpret the law created by another. Who created the law that the judges of Israel were to interpret? God. So God is king. He makes the law. The judges interpret and apply the law to the people. Now, when we get into Samuel, when we get into Deuteronomy, what did Deuteronomy chapter 17 tell Israel was to happen when they finally had a king? God knew they were going to have a king. His very first words were, when you get a king, here's what I want him to do. First day, you anoint him king. First thing he does, he spends the first and probably a couple months, going to be fair. You're going to take him to the temple. He's going to get a copy of the scroll of the entire, and by the way, at this point, it would have been the first 5 books of the Bible. Okay, it'd been the entire Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. May have gone beyond that, but at least that. And he is to sit down at a desk next to a priest, and he is to hand copy
The whole thing.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. By hand. And then after he's done that, then the priests look over and make sure he didn't make any mistakes. And if he made mistakes, he has to correct them. Okay. Hand copy with a quill. And by the way, maybe even with a chisel. We don't know whether it was on animal skin or on stone.
Oh yeah, because if it's done, that's a chisel.
Okay. Okay. And then it says this. It says once he has his copy that he handwrote himself, he is to spend every morning and every evening reading it. Why?
So he can learn it inside out.
Because his title may be king, but his job is still judge.
Yep.
He is an under king. Okay. What does God call David? A shepherd of his people. What God saw as a king was a shepherd to guide his people to follow him.
Yes.
Now, notice the big, this is also where we get the big contrast that First Samuel brings about David and Saul. Saul, and this is what they asked for, was a king like all the other nations had. He was arrogant. He was hard-headed. He thought power was everything. He thought his authority was everything. He was paranoid because he was always looking at who was going to try to take what he had. And he didn't trust God to keep him in the place that God had put him. David is a shepherd. He is God's choice. And when you start to walk through does David do things perfect? No. But as you walk through David's life, David's entire picture of himself is that he trusts God to give him what is. Remember, he waited 15, 20 years from his anointing to become king. We don't know exactly, but it's something to that area. Okay. Then he becomes king, and he's a man who had God's heart, whose God's heart was on. He was God's type of king. However, you get to 2 Samuel, and about 11 chapters into 2 Samuel, he got a bit big for his britches and said, well, I can have any woman I want, and blew it all up.
Much for that.
Okay. So this is an important element to this, is that what is going on here is what God is saying is that the situation in Jerusalem now is the same as the situation in the end of Judges. They're not letting me be king. They're all doing exactly what they want. They don't care. So guess what's going to happen? And in verse 6, therefore a lion from the forest shall strike them down. A wolf from the desert shall devastate them. A leopard is watching their cities. Everyone who goes out of them will be torn in pieces because their transgressions are many, their apostasies are great. Now, there is some discussion among scholars whether it's saying that at this point there were attacks from lions and wolves and leopards, or whether he's talking about nations that are going to come and punish Israel. Now, there are a couple of things you need to see. Okay. Now, mine says shall. Okay. Shall strike, shall devastate, shall be torn. It uses the future tense. The Bible does not use the future tense here. And the reason for that is because they have a tense that we never use, that we don't see in English. It's there, but it's not normally used. And it's called perfect. Okay. There is what is called a future perfect tense. And what it means is, or it's future past, or however you want to say it. It happens once and continues forever. Okay. In the New Testament, salvation is in the perfect tense. It happens. There's a point at which it begins that it happens. And then it continues forever. Okay. In the Old Testament, particularly in these, it's what is called, and I'm gonna phrase it this way, it's the prophetic perfect. Okay. And here's what that means. When a prophet uses the perfect tense this way, it means it is so certain to happen in the future, I can speak of it as if it already has. I can speak of it in the past tense, even though it hasn't happened, because it is absolutely certain, as if it has already happened. Okay. Therefore, a lion will strike them. In English, we have to do it in the future. But that's the idea. Therefore, a lion from the forest struck them. A wolf from the desert devastated them. Well, but that hasn't happened yet. Yeah, but it will.
It's to come, huh?
It's to come, but it's spoken of in a tense that actually is a past. The perfect is technically a past tense. Okay. But it continues. It's a past continuing. The event itself is not taken place yet, but the prophet speaks of it as if it already has. Why? Because their transgressions are many and their apostasies are great, because they're so wicked. And then it goes on, and this is God speaking here. It says, how can I pardon you? How can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me and sworn by those who are no gods. They've sworn by those that they think are gods, but aren't. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery. And remember, we've talked about how brutal Jeremiah gets about this. And trooped to the whorehouse. They were well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. Shall I not punish them for these things? Should I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And should I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? So he's asking a question. Can you give me a reason why I shouldn't? So verse 10, go up through her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. Strip away her branches, for they are not the Lord's. For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly treacherous to me, declares the Lord. Now, here is a very, very interesting dynamic that runs into, and it's a small moment of hope here. We talked a little bit in the John chapter 15 stuff about the pruning of grapevines. So what is he saying? Go through her vine rows and tear every single branch off. Not just prune it back, tear every single branch off. But don't take the root ball. Why? So it can grow back. Make not a full end. Strip all the branches. Why? Because all the branches are giving bad grapes.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if we tear them all out
Let them regrow.
and let it start to regrow, maybe the new branches will produce the kind of grapes I want. See, remember that when we talk about the northern kingdom, in a lot of ways, God made a full end of them. They were never a nation again. Now, there are those that came from the northern tribes that were folded into the southern. You still find people from that can trace their lineage to Dan and all of those. But as far as a national identity, they're gone. Right? It's why we call them the 10 lost tribes. They're not really lost, but they've never been a nation again. Okay. Strip away the branches. It says they have spoken falsely of the Lord. Now, here is the biggest one here. Okay. For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly treacherous to me, declares the Lord. They have spoken falsely of the Lord and have said, he won't do anything. There won't be any judgment. We won't see a sword or famine. These prophets are speaking falsely. So let's make sure that we understand just how brutal this moment is. This moment would be like you as a mother or dad saying, look, with you doing this, I'm going to have to punish me. No, you're not going to do anything to me. It's bowing up to your parent and going, yeah, there's nothing you can do. Sure there is. Remember a comedian that said, that tired always followed sick. And she goes, I'm just sick. And he goes, and tired. And he goes, I don't remember anything after that. But understand, okay, we've said this before. Boy, that doesn't sound good, does it? That sounds like, well, he's going to beat them. Well, unfortunately, there is a discussion of, I'm not saying abuse, but I am saying this. What does the Bible say? The one who spares the rod of discipline hates his child.
The rod of discipline, isn't that the idea of disciplining a child without hitting on them?
Well, but a rod, that's what it's used for. And by the way, let's be completely fair. Okay. Spanking a child is not abuse. Abusing a child
It's abuse.
is abuse. Now, is there a fine line there? Yes. And we have to be careful not to pass it.
But some people see a rod as a rod.
I'm not, well, it is a rod.
But
But-
you don't use a rod on a child.
Well,
You use
but-
a hand or
Belt
it
or
depends.
a ruler or
Okay. How many times in the past did you have parents that, hey, go choose a switch or a
Yeah.
belt or whatever? So understand that what we're talking about here is a touchy issue in our culture. Okay. If I beat my kid to injury just because I'm angry, that's not the rod of discipline. The rod of discipline is I'm trying to help you learn not to do this. And so my discipline is measured according to what it takes to get you to hear. Now, most of the time, and let's be completely fair, most of the time you can discipline a kid without any kind of physical act against them. Okay. However, I've known kids stubborn enough. Okay. But let's take it under the context that it's used with. The Lord is my shepherd, your rod and your staff, they comfort me, right? A staff was used to redirect. You would reach out, you'd grab them by the neck, redirect them. A rod was used to give them a little whack. There is no other way to look at that. But what does David say? The rod of your discipline is actually a comfort for me. Why? Because it says that you love me enough to discipline me. See, really, in a lot of ways, the discussion between discipline and abuse comes down to consistency. If I can say beforehand that if I do this, I'm going to receive I'm going to receive the not fun end of a belt. I know what I did. I know why it was wrong. I know why I'm being punished for it. If that's the case, and the punishment is measured, I want to make sure I say that, then I am fully aware of what I'm being punished for. And I learn something from the punishment. Abuse often flows into the idea of, I don't even know what I did. Right? An abusive parent is not consistent at all. One time you do this and no big deal. Oh yeah, kids will be kids. And the next time you get your butt beat. And maybe not just that. There's no consistency. And a consistent parent, the kid learns how to live in peace with their parent. Or they choose to rebel and receive the consequences. An inconsistent parent, you never know what you're going to get. And that typically is a determining factor of an abusive parent, is they're completely inconsistent. Something that was just fine yesterday is why? Because they're looking for an excuse. God uses the rod, but he's always consistent. He's always consistent within himself. So he says, look, the rod's coming because I've told you over and over, you need to stop. Right? It's the discussion of, playing in the street. You tell your kid not to play in the street. The first time he goes out and plays in the street, you bring him in, you give him time out or something like that. You need to not play in the street. You go out the next day, he's playing in the street again. Eventually you get to the point, okay, it seems like the only thing that's going to get your attention is if I apply pressure to the seat of the problem. Well, that's exactly what God did. Psst. Nuh-uh. Don't do that. Oh, no, we're going to do that. No, seriously, don't do that. Oh, no, we're going to do it. You can't tell us no. Up to the point, notice, he's not going to do anything. Okay. Let me show you how much I'm not going to do anything. Therefore, thus says the Lord, this verse 14, the God of hosts, because you have spoken this word, because you have said that I won't do anything. Behold, I am making my words in your mouth a fire, and this people would. Now he's talking to Jeremiah. So because the people have said, oh, God won't do anything. Okay, Jeremiah, I'm making the words in your mouth a fire, and the people are kindling. And the fire shall consume them. Behold, I am bringing against you a nation from afar, O house of Israel, declares the Lord. It is an enduring nation. It is an ancient nation, a nation whose language you do not know, nor can you understand what they say. Their quiver is like an open tomb. They are all mighty warriors. Their quiver is death. They are mighty warriors. They shall eat up your harvest and your food. They shall eat up your sons and your daughters. They shall eat up your flocks and your herds. They shall eat up your vines and your fig trees, your fortified cities in which you trust. They shall beat down with the sword. I'm going to send a people against you. Now we know it's Babylon. And they will eat you alive. And then verse 18, we have a moment of hope. But even in those days, declares the Lord, I will not make a full end of you. I will not destroy you utterly. And when your people say, why has the Lord our God done all these things to us? You shall say to them, as you have forsaken me and served foreign gods in your land, so you shall serve foreigners in a land that's not yours. If you want to serve gods that are not from here, then you can go serve over there. And kind of, the parent thing again, it's kind of like sending your kids to military school.
I think about that from time to time.
Declare this in the house of Jacob, proclaim it in Judah. Hear this, you foolish, senseless people. So I'm just going to modern day vernacular. Here's what God has told Jeremiah to say. Hear this, you stupid, stupid people. You have eyes, but you don't see. You have ears, but you don't hear. Don't you fear me, declares the Lord? Do you not tremble before me? I placed the sand as a boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. You know that sandy beach? I put that there so the sea can't pass it. Though the waves toss, they can't prevail. Though they roar, they can't pass over. But this people has a stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. So watch, don't you tremble? I set the boundaries for the oceans. You know those powerful waters that beat up against your western shore? I put those there. And yet you won't obey? They do not say in their hearts, let's fear the Lord our God, who gives us rain in its season, the autumn rain and the spring rain, and keeps for us the weeks appointed for the harvest. They don't say in their hearts, hey, God provided our rain, God provided our crops, God set the days for the harvest and all of that. We don't need to. Your iniquities have turned these away, and your sins have kept good from you. So let's go back. We're once again talking about previous prophets. When the northern kingdom turned into the first time they turned into tremendous idolatry under Ahab, what does God do? He takes the rain away. 3.5 years without a drop of rain. Now, I know some of you have lived through here for a while, and we go 6 months and we're in trouble. Okay, I'm going to tell you, I saw a lot of happiness this morning because there was about 40 hundredths of water in the snow from Saturday. Because we're like, we only need some rain. 3.5 years, not a drop. Why'd that happen? Well, Jeremiah just gives us the answer. Your iniquity have turned these away. Your sin has turned the rain back. Your sin has kept blessing from you. For wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. They set a trap. They catch men like a cage full of birds. Their houses are full of deceit. So he's saying, hey, there are people among you who are looking to catch and destroy your own people. Therefore they have become great and rich. They've grown fat and sleek at the expense of others. They know no bounds in the deeds of evil. They judge not with justice. The cause of the fearless to make it prosper, and they do not defend the rights of the needy. Shouldn't I punish them for that? Declares the Lord. Should I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? And then it goes to the final two verses, and it says, an appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their direction. So let's make sure we understand what he's saying. Here's the ultimate thing. Even the ones who claim to speak for me do not. By the way, the phrase we saw earlier, oh, God won't punish us, God won't do anything. That was what the false prophets were saying. No, we're still good. It's all good. We see this a lot in Jeremiah, that there are false prophets who are countering everything he tries to say and going, no, it's not. That's not how it's going to happen. So here's the idea. Here's the appalling and horrible thing that's happened in the land. There are people claiming to speak for God who are saying the opposite of what God would be saying. And the priests, the one who are supposed to be leading the people to worship, are living at their direction. No. It's perfectly okay for you to go in and provide a sacrifice on Saturday to the Lord and then go up to the high place and give one of your kids to Molech on Monday. No problem. My people love to have it so. But notice these last words. But what will you do when the end comes?
Correct.
So you're super happy with the way things are going, but how are you going to feel when I step in? What we are watching is a nation that is falling away from God, and God, like a magnanimous husband, going, please turn back. Please stop this. You're hurting yourself. You're destroying yourself. But you seem to not want to listen. You're going to keep going your own way. So eventually, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to have to step in. Understand, God is not capricious. God is not. We know what he'll do. He may not do things on our timing, but we know how he reacts. We can take it to the bank that if we continue to live in rebellion to God, eventually he's going to step in. And that's what we're seeing.
With these churches that preach like you're a child of the king and you can just have everything you want and do whatever you want. Are they like false prophets?
I think there's a level to that. But I think that there are a lot of churches that fall under other areas that live into that same discussion. But understand, and I hate to be this way, but statistics, and they're a few years old. I don't know what the most recent statistics are. 75% of churches in the United States are either stagnant or they're dying. Okay. I once again, I don't know what the current ones are, but let's deal Southern Baptists for just a moment. Okay. This is 5 or 6 years ago. Well, this is probably 10 to 15 years ago. So I don't know that it is. I don't know if it has righted itself at any level. But as of 2001, 2002, they would tell you that the last year that the Southern Baptist Convention had a year that they had more baptisms than the year before was 1950.
Hmm.
So for the space of 50 years, every year the number of baptisms went down.
Oh, goodness.
Okay. Now let's talk about this. I'm gonna close this. We're gonna do this off the